This is the 23rd, I think we counted. Deb, somewhere in the back there. The 23rd lecture in this series that is hosted by SSU's Department of Education and funded by an endowment left by E. Pauline Riall, got it right. And this speaker series has featured individuals such as Ernest Boyer, Mary Bud Rowe, Elliot Eisner, Maxine Green, and Cornell West, and of course other distinguished individuals as well. Now, it is not my task this evening to introduce our speaker, Herbert Kohl. However, I can't resist a couple of preliminary remarks, and this will not be a formal introduction. But I did have the opportunity today to read a chapter from his book, The Discipline of Hope. And as I was telling Mr. Kohl, Dr. Kohl, whatever, I can relate to much of what he has written and what he has said. In particular, as I have followed my children, who are now teenagers, through the school system, I believe that many of his observations are right on target. And Mr. Kohl really is a philosopher, not just an expert in education. And I very much enjoyed some of his observations. And I just have to quote very briefly from The Discipline of Hope. And this is from chapter 5, Fresh Waters Are Ever Flowing. In it, he writes of his students, who he takes out of a traditional school setting and brings into a non-traditional setting. I believe it was a class of 8 students, which sounds wonderful to me. He says, I wanted them to feel that the class was a voyage, an exploration of fundamental human issues that connected them with the intellectual traditions and academic knowledge involved in building a democratic society. I wanted them to become engagés, that is, passionately concerned with understanding and shaping the world they lived in. And he says that as a teacher, he had been conditioned from the time he entered kindergarten. I hope I'm not taking your speech. As a teacher, he knew and had been instructed that school was for learning. Time must be filled with measurably meaningful activity. Work must be demanding and have an edge to prove that it's serious. The goals of learning must be set out clearly and measurably. And he writes, part of me has not been able to escape the feeling that if I can't control learning and know what my students are doing, that learning isn't taking place and I'm not doing my job. So that was the teacher in him. Yet the educator, he wrote, the educator in me knows that the teacher is often misguided when it comes to understanding how learning takes place, trusting students, letting things move towards goals in diverse and frequently digressive ways, following enthusiasms and responding to events and experiences are not diversions or wastes of time. Rather, they are the essence of substantive learning. And I have to tell you, I was very pleased to read that because in my years in the classroom, there have been many, many digressions. And I was glad to hear that perhaps they were not time wasted. In any case, I think we're in for a treat this evening. And I greet all of you this evening and thank you Mr. Kohl, for coming to Salisbury State University. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Beth Barnett, and I'm the Dean of Education and Professional Studies here at Salisbury State University. And I also bring greetings with these are, of course, from the Sidell School and the Education Department. This is wonderful to see so many of you coming out tonight to hear Dr. Kohl speak to us. I suspect some of that has to do with all the good things he's been doing across some of your classes today. The feedback's been wonderful, and it's made us anticipate a little bit more what we're going to hear tonight from him. My job, in addition to bringing greetings, is also to tell you slightly about the origins of this particular endowment. You can read in your brochure tonight about Pauline Riall and what her career path was, but she was a very important person here at Salisbury State University. Those of us in education, of course, live in Carruthers Hall, which was her original lab school here on campus. So I think her spirit probably surrounds us throughout most of what we're doing in education. I also, though, want to take the opportunity to introduce a guest we have with us tonight, Dr. Maurice Balsman, who was at one point the chair of the education department and now, of course, is a Riall Professor Emeritus. Without Dr. Balsman's foresight and, I think, vision for what was needed at Salisbury State University in education, we would not have this lecture series. So, Dr. Balsman, may I ask you to stand just for 1 second, please? No, thank you. I also, of course, bring thanks to the Riall Committee, who, of course, had the foresight to think of such a wonderful person to bring to Salisbury State for us to listen to. And those include Dr. Melissa Gilletta, Dr. Joel Jenny, Dr. Patricia Richards, and Dr. Deb Patrick. So again, thanks to them. Have a wonderful evening, and again, thank you for joining us.
I get to give the formal introduction, and it's with great pleasure that I do so. Herbert Kohl attended the Bronx High School of Science and studied philosophy and mathematics at Harvard, Oxford, and Columbia University. His childhood dream was to become a teacher in the New York City public schools. That dream was realized in 1962 when he walked into PS 103 in Harlem as a 6th grade teacher. There, he discovered a building in a state of terminal disarray with 35 desks for 36 children. 35 desks for 36 children. Excitement about facing his new situation was quickly tempered by rage at what he saw in the school. And so began Herbert Kohl's teaching and writing career. For the next 35 years, Herbert Kohl has taught every grade from kindergarten through graduate school. He is the exemplar of a reflective practitioner. He's written over 40 books and articles, including The Age of Complexity, Teaching the Unteachable, 36 Children, Growing Minds, On Teaching, Basic Skills, I Won't Learn From You, Should We Burn the Bar, Reading How To, A Book of Puzzlements, Mathematical Puzzlements, Growing with Your Children, Half the House, and The Discipline of Hope. He's also written books for children. The View from the Oak, The Private Worlds of Other Creatures, co-authored with his wife Judy, won the National Book Award for Children's Literature. Kohl founded and was first director of the Teachers and Writers Collaborative. In 1977, he established the Coastal Ridge Research and Education Center in Point Arena, California. He served on the board of the Atari Education Foundation and consulted with the Bavarian project of Apple computers. He's worked with Amnesty International and co-authored a curriculum on conscience and human rights for them. For the past 2.5 years, he has served as research fellow at the University of San Francisco and senior fellow at the Open Society Institute, a part of the Soros Foundation's network. Currently, he's director of the Center for Teaching Excellence and Social Justice at the University of San Francisco. Herbert Kohl, throughout his career, has remained committed to 2 driving ideas. The first is that a passionate concern for justice is at the core of all decent education. The second is that no matter what current conditions seem to indicate, there is no child, no person, who cannot learn and grow through the caring and generous effort of others. Mr. Kohl says that children are wonderful and complicated. Understanding those things is at the heart of all good education, intellectual, social, and moral. Reviewers praise The Discipline of Hope as a book that will recharge a teacher's batteries. He certainly recharged mine. Mr. Kohl, thank you for being there in these dark times when everyone knows best, especially those who are not educators. For keeping our eyes on the prize, decency in an indecent world. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you someone who has every right to talk about education and education reform, and to whose words and wisdom we should pay close attention, because he is and will always be, first and foremost, a teacher, Herbert Kohl.
I'm not sure I recognize myself in all of that. I'm going to start by telling some stories. This is an unusual circumstance for me to be in because being that my whole life has been teaching, I've always loved to make eye contact with people, and I can't do that here because of the lights. So if I seem slightly disoriented, I hope you'll forgive me. I wanted to elaborate on that story about fresh waters are forever flowing. I hadn't thought that I was going to do that, but I'll do that before I get into some of my more prepared remarks. Though as a storyteller, preparation is always moot. The story is more important than the preparation, as every good teacher should know. And in fact, every good teacher is, in effect, a storyteller. Doesn't work from a script, even if they try to force you to work from a script, but is really telling tales of knowledge and the importance of knowledge, telling tales of learning, telling tales of respect, telling tales of love, telling tales of hope. And that the whole point of teaching and the whole joy of teaching is that you can kindle in young people some sense of what they might be, some sense of the extraordinariness they might have in themselves, and some way of getting them out of what is currently what I would call the failure system. System in which some kids succeed and some kids fail. And you know, by the time, to call a kid by the age of 7 a failure, there's something obscene about it, something evil about it, something that reeks of authoritarianism, of rejection. So thinking as a teacher is terribly important. Thinking as an educator. How do you think that way? How do you think yourself into a world in which kids are not failing and you're not the governor of success and failure, but the nurturer of beauty and of flowering? There's a wonderful Catalan painter by the name of Joan Miró, and Miró has an essay in which he says, "I paint like a gardener. I see my canvas grow the way flowers grow in a garden." And I spent a lot of time thinking about that particular essay because I realized at one point that a major overriding metaphor for teaching is being a gardener. You have to prepare the soil. You have to make sure that the plants are watered. You don't want to put the certain plants into too much sun, and you don't want to put certain plants outside of any sun. But the important thing about gardening, in particular if you're growing flowers, is that you're doing it for the sake of the flowers themselves, not for your sake. You're doing it because there is some deep internal joy in watching others grow. And I'd say when I started teaching, when I started thinking about teaching, when I was about 13, I believe, it had to do with the fact that one of my high school teachers asked me to tutor his son, who happened to have had cerebral palsy and was homebound. And in the course of my doing this, and I got paid $1 a lesson in, that must have been 1951 or 52. You could actually get somewhere on $1. You know, that right now it's not much, but is that I saw this young man, who was really just a year younger than me, grow, and I wasn't ever sure what I was doing to help him, except to provide him with resources, to sit and read to him and read with him, to be with him, to care about him. But there was something so joyous about witnessing growth that I've never really forgotten. It's interesting, when I graduated from Holloway University, my senior tutor said to me, "So what are you going to do now? Which graduate school are you going to go to?" And I said, "Well, I think that I'm going to become a school teacher." And he said, "Harvard men don't teach school." And I said to him, "I'm not a Harvard man. I went to Harvard. I come from the Bronx. I went to public schools in New York. I'm going to be a school teacher." And it took me about 3 years after that to get the courage to actually go back to New York City, go to Teachers College Columbia, get my credentials, and actually become a New York City public school teacher. And that, by the way, is the theme of this, is that I've been doing this now since 1961. Teaching, and when it said that I taught kindergarten through graduate school, it's not in that order. Okay? Started with the 6th grade. Went on to run a storefront school in East Harlem. Taught at UC Berkeley. Ran a high school in Berkeley. Taught kindergarten in 1st grade. Ran a teacher education program. Taught in a one-room schoolhouse up in Mendocino County. Now doing, working with teachers who are trying to, see, I think teacher training is the worst word that you can ever use. It's the education, or as my friend Paulo Freire would have said, the formation of teachers. Because it's a formative action. It is something that happens over a period of time. You know what you train? You can train rats. Maybe they don't get trained, but they kind of are obedient. We have a large golden retriever who weighs about 100 pounds, and just try to train him. I mean, I have a vague feeling that he's trained my wife and myself. Because he gets what he wants, right? And every once in a while, he kind of says, "All right, I'll let them have a little something. You know, I'll sit down, I'll put a floor up. But in fact, when I want to go out, I want to go out. And when I want to run, I want to run." And it's that kind of wonderful sense of will that is at the center of teaching. A lot of my writing has to do with social justice, but it also has to do with the idea that children choose to learn or choose not to learn. They don't fail very often. They choose not to learn because what the system is putting them through is something that they are rejecting, or something in the system has rejected them. Terribly important to understand that learning is willed behavior. People choose to learn, they don't get trained to learn. And they can also, if you can choose to do something, you can also choose to not do it. I don't know how many of you, I know a lot of women in my daughter's class at Rhode Island School of Design decided, because they felt the painting department was sexist, that they would choose not to learn painting, and they transferred into printmaking instead. They decided to do that. They had a reason to do that. A lot of African American students that I've worked with have decided in school not to put up with a racist system. And therefore they manifest their resistance to learning in many complicated ways. They punish that because the system, from their perspective, is rejecting them and putting them in very compromising, difficult situations. Now, sometimes that resistance is dysfunctional. Sometimes it causes you more damage than you realize is happening. A 7-year-old won't realize that by refusing to learn how to read, they may be damaged in the future. But a teacher who realizes that someone's refusing to learn how to read has an obligation to change the way they teach reading. Whatever the state says, whatever the high-stakes testing is, whatever the demands are, the center of education is the child and the nurturance of the child. That is the goal of teaching. That is the honor and the obligation and the importance of teaching. You know, that fresh waters are forever flowing, that ideal class of 8 students that I had in Point Arena, California. Fresh waters forever flowing comes from a quote from Heraclitus that says, "You never step into the same river twice because fresh waters are forever flowing." Well, where I live, there's a stream called Boulder Creek, and it's really quite beautiful. It goes out to the Pacific Ocean. This is at my home, not where I teach. And every year the stream changes. It's a creek. And sometimes during the year, you can walk across it practically in your bare feet. Sometimes after the rains, during the rainy season, when the snow is melting, it's a raging torrent of water. Sometimes it goes straight out to the ocean. Sometimes it curves and twists back in on itself. And then sometimes, if it's really quiet time, it doesn't go to the ocean at all. Right now, it's hardly reached the ocean. I was there about a week. And that's the way the school year is shaped. That you do not teach the same way every year. If there's anything I can say strongly as a message to young teachers, is do not think that you will ever get this down straight or will ever try to do the same thing every year, because by the time you're doing that, you're functioning mechanically. You have to look on a school year as a flowing stream that may be a rainy year, maybe a dry year. It may be a stormy year. Storms may come from unexpected places. There may be stormy things like when I was teaching the assassination of President Kennedy. What am I going to do? Teach when in the middle of the school year, I was teaching 6th grade, Kennedy gets assassinated, and do the same thing that I otherwise would have done? Just to get on with the business of teaching? Or do you have to stop? Change direction? Rethink what you're doing? Same thing happened in the neighborhood I happened to be teaching. It was where Malcolm X was at Temple No. 7. Everybody in the neighborhood had known him and encountered him. I had the pleasure to listen to him on the street corner a lot. And what do you do? Just ignore it? When he gets assassinated? Or when Martin Luther King gets assassinated? Or when we have a presidential election that's totally locked up and people don't know what's coming next? That the historical moment and the historical times in which you're at has to be encapsulated into and wrapped into your teaching. You know what that means? It means that you have to be an educated citizen. And you have to be an educated person. Because you can't just motivate kids if you don't know them. So that the teacher, herself or himself, has to become a very knowledgeable scholar, a real intellectual. That teaching comes from the heart and it comes from the mind. And that teachers have to be both intellectuals and scholars, and very hard work, by the way, and caring people, and enormously crafty. Have to be a good trickster. Now, when I taught that group of 8 to 9 kids in Point Arena that was mentioned, that the president mentioned, what wasn't mentioned, but, and you probably don't know about, is first of all, one of them was my son, who was in high school at the time, rest of them represented the rest of his reggae band, the skating contingent and the surfing contingent at the high school, and a few other people there who basically the school would allow me to teach anywhere under any circumstance or anything you wanted because they had no use for these kids. Of course, these were all kids I'd known. These were my son and his friends. And what I was supposed to teach is civics, sociology, and economics. Civics in school tends to mean reading the state constitution and saying you're going to be a good person without reading it. Good voter. Sociology means sex education. And economics means learning how to fill out a checkbook and borrow money and get in debt. So those were not quite classes that I felt that I could in all conscience teach. So what I did was I took sociology, civics, and economics and decided that the entire class would be on the creation of a society that the kids would want to live in, that they would have to negotiate for themselves, that they would have to figure out whether they want, what kind of constitution they wanted, what kind of Bill of Rights they wanted. They also had to, since remember I got a bunch of skateboarders and surfers, they knew how to use epoxy. They built a 4-foot by 8-foot epoxy model of a landscape they created, and we were going to settle 4,000 people on that land. And we had to decide what's going to grow on the land, where the clusters of houses are going to be, where the energy sources are. We have a river running through it, where there's a river runs through our community. They had to decide how to deal with the outside world. They had to decide on an economy, how to decide on a currency system. Now, I didn't tell them just make it up. Because a lot of people who do things like that would basically say, we're going to create a society, make it up. What I did was got the Constitution of the State of California, one of what I consider to be the best crafted constitutions in the world, which is the Constitution of Namibia, the draft constitution from the Union of South Africa. This was while Nelson Mandela was still at Robben Island. I got the Constitution of the Soviet Union, the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and not only the Bill of Rights, but the 4 drafts of the Bill of Rights. Because believe it or not, of the Declaration of Independence. Because believe it or not, in one draft of the Declaration of Independence, slavery was abolished. It's in the historical record. You don't hear about that much. That was, 1776. It saved a lot of pain, a lot of turmoil, and a lot of lives. So, and then I got briefing books from the U.S. State Department. Then I put together a briefing book for my students that was this thick with articles on sociology, culture, on land development, on solar energy, on growing food, all that stuff. And so what I've done is taken a very simple idea that could have just been a student-based idea. Because I knew these kids well enough to know that they could make up stuff right away. But I didn't want them to do that. I wanted them to do it in a thoroughly informed manner. Because I wanted them to, and they all do now, vote and be smart, intelligent, sensitive, articulate citizens. And of course we had a lot of time to talk. As the model moved around, we had all kinds of funny conversations, by the way. Should people with AIDS be allowed into the community when we were settled? Should growing marijuana be legal? young kids, right? These are all on, should there be a prohibition on meat? And the meatitarians and the vegetarians had these big fights over what kind of food habits people should have. That was one of the more delightful things we did. And so I said, okay, I'll tell you what. You can't argue over this. It's foolish. You've got a land here. You've got certain things. You call the California State Department of Agriculture and find out how much of this land could sustain, how many cows, how many chickens, figure out how much fish is in the thing and what other kind of food you want to grow, and see if the land, what can the land sustain? What can it actually sustain? And in this particular part of the world, we have dairy farms, and the farmers have some knowledge about that. Fact is, if the kids had beef, there'd be no land. Cows would have eaten everything up. They have to import at McDonald's. You know? That the land would not sustain that. Chickens were okay. Fish were okay. Lots of vegetables. So all of a sudden, it was, we're not going to develop a cattle industry. We're going to have wild pigs. Yeah, just so you can go hunting and fishing, right? Well, I know a lot of the kids in my community love to go hunting and fishing, and they release a bunch of domestic pigs every year. They go wild very fast. People go hunt them. And so, in effect, what I was doing was helping the kids construct a world based on what is already in the world. Based on the knowledge and the wisdom and the efforts of other people to create society. So here's where you know, I mean, that particular chapter of Discipline of Hope, I really tried to talk about the balance between teaching well, having a real relationship with people, and having them have enormous creative input in the context of informed intellectual conversation. Now, some of the most informed intellectual conversation I've ever had was in kindergarten and first grade. I mean, the little kids are really smart. And I'll give you a funny example. My daughter Tanya was in my kindergarten class in Berkeley. I was teaching in a K1, there's a K1 class in Berkeley. And one day, one of the girls came in and she stood outside the door. She was crying, you know? And I asked that, Lisa, what's going on? What's the problem? She didn't want to talk. None of your business. So a couple of other kids in the class went up to talk to her. Then they came to me and said, Herbert, look, her mom and dad just split up. We'll take care of her. You don't understand this. He said, there's a couple of kids. I said, we've been through it before. These are 5 and 6-year-olds. And they have been through it. They know all about it. And they really did nurture her through that. The other kind of intellectual conversations, and this is what, I mean, is, for example, in that same kindergarten, first grade class, we studied Africa. Now, the way that was generally taught, and you'll see a lot of kids who are really young say, Africa's a country. Not only on this continent with incredible diversity and cultural riches and complex political and social and economic life and enormous history, but a country. So what I did was we studied Ghana, we studied Tanzania, and we studied South Africa, and we studied, let's see, what was it? I think it was either Morocco or Togo. It was a Muslim country in the north. Now, this is kindergarten and first grade. On a complicated level, in a very sophisticated level. And it would start with things like the Anansi stories, and start with stories and tales and literature, but it would start with a map. It would start with a sense of history, it would start with videos, and so on. So I had to work very, very hard for my 5 and 6 year olds. We had in the same group of kids, the next year was the time of the United Farm Workers boycott. And my kids wanted to go out and boycott Safeway. This was in Berkeley, right? And these are 5 and 6 year olds, they were all going to go out and walk out of school and boycott Safeway. And I said, why, first of all, are you going to boycott Safeway? Because Safeway kills farm workers. I said, Safeway kills farm workers. I said, who are the farm workers? Where do they work? How does the grape go from the ground into Safeway? What is Safeway's political, economic, and social role? Why is it people have chosen to boycott Safeway? Who are the United Farmers? And I brought in a couple of union organizers from the UFW. Kids went out, and I said, and what you should do is instead of just, you know, kind of going out and boycotting Safeway, you know what you should do? Talk to people about your ideas about this. Tell people what you think. Tell them what you know about the wages of people in the fields, the pesticides, the struggle for unionization and so on. Be an educated 6-year-old. Now, I can guarantee you that a lot of people who are adults didn't know as much as my 6-year-olds about that. And by the way, I did not propagandize them because some said, well, we don't want to do it because we don't agree. I said, fine. You've got to be informed when you decide to agree or disagree. I don't believe in propagandizing anybody. I don't believe in anyone having, if anyone says I've adopted your politics, I shudder. Because then I've failed. See, because if they said, I have developed my way of looking at the world, and it's somewhat similar to yours, or it's completely different than yours, but I've done it in an informed and sensible manner, then it's something really respectable. I have to tell you a funny story about one of my former students who was one of the kids in 36 Children. I was giving a commencement talk at Evergreen State College a couple of years ago, and one of the young women who was graduating from getting a teaching credential and a master's came up to me and said, I'm your grandchild. I said, what do you mean you're my grandchild? I have been pretty kosher all my life. My wife and I have been married for 38 years. I don't have any grandchildren yet. And she said, yeah, but I'm really your grandchild. She said, Desiree, who's one of the kids in 36 Children, was her teacher in high school. These things come around. If you hang in long enough, they come around and they come back to you. And they come back in the most wonderful ways. And when you first start out teaching, it's rough to learn how to teach. It takes a couple of years to get command of yourself. It takes a couple of years to get settled in your life after college. It takes a couple of years to find the right place to teach it. It takes a couple of years to learn how to be subversive and not get fired every time. Well, there's nothing wrong with being subversive, and there's nothing wrong with being fired. But you have to choose when, how, what, and why. Because, you don't want to get fired for any dumb reasons. And I don't particularly urge anyone to get fired. But if you stand up for principle, then you have to take cases. And I think that one of the things most called for in education in the United States is for talk against the things being done to them. The kind of formulaic teaching, the mechanization of education, the obsession with high-stakes testing, the taking power away from teachers' voices. And what we need is courageous young people who will be willing to take risks. But a little bit of advice from me. Don't take a risk until you feel secure enough that you're a good teacher. In other words, don't go in and take a risk week 2 of your first semester. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. And not only that, you'll never learn how to teach. See, one of the interesting things is that when you become secure as a teacher, you can develop the internal basis and the moral grounds upon which you can make demands. Demands for your profession, demands for your students, demands for the community in which you're privileged to teach. And remember, teaching is a serving profession. I mean, we all serve the children and their parents. And I think we have to never forget that. And as long as you do that, and remember that, then as you develop, you'll find yourself moving along the road of 2 things. 1, getting the respect of your peers and the respect of your community and the respect of your students. And 2, moving on the edge towards risk. Moving on the edge towards saying, I don't like what's going on here. This is not good for my students, or this is not good for students in general, or the politicians think they know something that they're ignorant of. Because I guarantee you, there's nobody more ignorant of what education should be like than politicians. I don't think. And there's nobody more arrogant in assuming they know what's good for kids and for teachers. But anyone who's gone to school thinks they're an expert on education. And that's something that teachers have to really worry about. Because people come in and say, Herb, I don't like what you're doing. You say, okay. What do you want to happen? Well, I want my kid to read and write. And how come you sit around with your kids and you do theater all the time? Or how come you sit around with your kids and you're having these debates? Or you have a courtroom in the classroom so that when there's a discipline problem, the kids have to figure out a way non-punitively to resolve it. How come you're reading a book and instead of reading the whole book, you read 3 pages and then you spend an hour talking about those 3 pages? I say, you want to know how come? It's easy. I want the kids to be intelligent. I want them to learn. If you can't speak, you can't learn. If you can't speak in a civil and social context with other people in a respectful manner, you can't learn. And if you can't find yourself interested in intellectual ideas, then why read? You'll end up not reading. My feeling is that schools, as currently structured, want you to go from here to here, to point 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 here, and then if the kid drops off on any of those points, you just bump them out, right? Put them in special ed, call them these students, denigrate them in one way or another, try to transfer them to someone else's classroom, all the techniques that exist in schools that I've seen over the years. Now, my feeling is education goes like this. It's a wandering journey. But look, I started here, and I want to end up here. So I'm not saying you don't go from here to here. I'm saying the route is what the art of teaching is all about. There's a wonderful word for that, by the way, called wayfinding. The wayfinding. How do you help people find their way? And it's a profession, by the way. If you're a good artist and you want to do something really curious and interesting, you go and get a degree in wayfinding. You'll find a couple of colleges, universities that do it, and actually it's an architectural degree. Wayfinding is How do you get from the parking lot of a ball field to your exact seat if there were no signs? And if there were no paths? If there were no ways to traverse, no signage to direct you, no arrows, and no alternative routes in case it gets too crowded. That's wayfinding. For example, how do you navigate your way around a city? If there were no, when I was in Havana in 1956, I believe, 55, 56, there were no traffic lights and no stop signs. Do you imagine what it's like to have I mean, I thought this was going to be the fast end of a young life. You know? But you see, it's that attention to what surrounds you that makes for good teaching. Looking at wayfinding, looking at signage, looking at the ways in which people make their way through the world, because our goal and our role as a teacher is to help people make their way through the world. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to read a poem which really is written by Denise Levertov, a really wonderful poet who is unfortunately no longer with us, but was a good friend. And in this poem, she talks about what to me is the essence of teaching, the essence of learning. In the poem, it says, two girls discover the secret of life in a sudden line of poetry. I, who don't know the secret, wrote the line. They told me through a third person they had found it, but not what it was, not even what line it was. No doubt by now, more than a week later, they have forgotten the secret. The line, the name of the poem. I love them for finding what I can't find, and for loving me for the line I wrote, and for forgetting it, so that 1,000 times till death finds them, they may discover it again in other lines, in other happenings, and for wanting to know it, for assuming there is such a secret. Yes, for that most of all. But that's our goal, is to be that poet, to be that person who sparks in some sense that they've seen something secret and beautiful, something secret and wonderful, something important about being alive. Sure, we give them skills. Sure, we do all the other stuff. But to see the secret of life, and when she means forgetting it, meaning that you have to relearn it, because you're not going to find the secret of life. And in addition, there are many secrets, and in addition, each time you find the secret has to be rediscovered and renewed. A little bit of advice in terms of renewal for people who are just setting out on teaching. One, be sure to find the right age kids to teach for you. Be sure to find out what age group of children you feel comfortable with and really want to teach. I mentioned earlier today to some of the students, when I was teaching in 6th grade in Holland, one of the teachers who was a really wonderful person, and Maggie was teaching kindergarten, 1st grade, and she wanted to have very complex political discussions. I mean, complex, not the ones I was talking about before, but real intellectual discussions and read the sociological texts and all. And she was getting angry at her kindergarten, 1st grade kids because they couldn't do it. And I said, well, what do you expect? I said, why don't you find somewhere else to teach? She became the best junior high teacher I've ever seen. Because as most people who've ever worked with junior high kids know, they will question everything. They are willing to argue about anything. They're willing to contest ideas. They're willing to contest reality itself if it comes to it. And that's wonderful. And so instead of saying, oh, these terrible kids, you help them contest their reality through what you bring to them and through your allowing them a voice to to feel strong and intelligent and contestation. There's nothing wrong with argumentation in the classroom if it's civil. In fact, there's nothing the society needs more than civility, as we've seen in the last couple of years. I'm going to kind of wind up in a few minutes because I really would love to take a bunch of questions. But I was going to tell a story about another student of mine and then read you one of his poems. When I say a student of mine, if you get to be over 60, you just think about it for yourself. If you're 23 and you're teaching 6th grade, your kids are 12. So there's 10 years. By the time you're 60, over 60, your students are over 50. So when I refer to some of these people, this particular student is now over 50. His name is Victor Hernandez Cruz, and he's a very famous Puerto Rican poet. Now, when I first met him, I was running a storefront school in East Harlem for kids who were kind of hanging around Benjamin Franklin High School with nowhere to go. And they just were looking for any storefront that was open to them. And we welcomed everybody, and I taught a writing class. And I would urge every teacher to read lots of poems in every class, across the curriculum, to get a whole bunch of short poems and start every day with a poem. I wrote this book called A Grain of Poetry, which just came out in paperback 2 days ago. We don't have copies of it here today, so I'm not trying to sell anything. But it's an attempt to get people who don't feel comfortable with poetry to feel comfortable reading poetry and really enjoying it in the largest and most multiple voices of this very complex and multiple nation. And what I would do those days is, this is 1965, right at the beginning of this group called Teachers and Writers Collaborative, which I founded, which has the best material in existence on the teaching of writing, I believe. Published about 50 books on that. And they're all available by mail order. I'm sure people here can tell you how to get a catalog. If you write and tell them that I told you to write, they'll send you a catalog free and a copy of their newsletter. I'm positive. And you'll find it very exciting. Anyway, it's 5 Union Square West, by the way. New York 10003. I go there all the time. And I'm still on the board, though I'm not really actively involved. And so Victor comes into the storefront, and what I do is give everybody a poem, and then I ask all of the students to go around the room and write a poem to the poem. In other words, if I picked up Denise's poem, I'd ask everybody to write a poem about the secret of life, about discovery of the secret of life, about forgetfulness, or about an author not knowing what line they did that affected somebody. There's so many themes in that simple poem that you can tease out to challenge new writing. See, that's where you have to constantly be active in thinking about that. And Victor came in and we did an exercise. He wrote this extraordinarily brilliant poem. And then I thought he memorized it because it was too good. And then I asked people to do a second poem in the class because I was trying to test Victor. And he did a second poem and then did a third poem. And if you've never been to New York, this won't make any sense to you, but basically I was saying, but the theme of the poem was that you were on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and you broke up with either your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and you were on the bus going uptown to East Harlem and you were passing Bloomingdale's. What were you thinking? Now that's very specific. And I was totally positive that there were no poems in the universe that anyone had ever written on that before. And so it was real easy for me to say, okay, I got him this time. Out comes a third absolutely brilliant poem. And all of a sudden I realized, I'm in the presence of someone who is currently at the age of 16 a better poet than I will ever be, with as much skill and talent linguistically as anyone I've ever met who is a total natural. You know, like you see athletes who are naturals and musicians who are naturals and all. He was a linguistic and poetic natural. Because I didn't know at that time. He'd read all of William Collins Williams by this time, and was a good friend of Allen Ginsberg's, and that he really was, from the age of 12, a highly sophisticated and educated poet. But I told Victor, I said to Victor, look, what I want to do is this. I can't teach you how to write poetry. Now this is, by the way, the analogy between teachers who cannot teach their students how to do computers because the kids can do the computers better than the teachers. So this is not an ill-chosen analogy. You're going to run into kids who are much faster and much smarter than you at working with computers, who catch on more, and who probably by the time they reach the 6th grade have had more experience with computers than you will ever have. Some of you may be the same way vis-a-vis some of your professors here. I have no idea. I won't presume. But there is, you do that very well. So I said, Victor, let's teach this class together, and I'll provide you with the resources. To go back to the Joan Miro analogy, I'll provide the fertile ground in which you can grow, and I'll provide the water, and you provide the poetry. And he's been doing it ever since. He's published, I think 10, 15 volumes of poetry, both in English and in Spanish. And I wanted to end reading one of Victor's poems, which is called Problems with Hurricanes. Now, any of you have experienced a hurricane? I don't know if there are hurricanes around here. There are, okay. All right, well, this is a tropical hurricane, right? It's called Problems with Hurricanes. A campesino looked at the air and told me, with hurricanes, it's not the wind or the noise or the water. I'll tell you, he said, it's the mangoes, avocados, green plantains, and bananas flying into town like projectiles. How would your family feel if they had to tell the generations that you got killed by a flying banana? Death by drowning has honor. If the wind picked you up and slammed you against a mountain boulder, this would not carry shame. But to suffer a mango smashing your skull, or a plantain hitting your temple at 70 miles per hour is the ultimate disgrace. The campesino takes off his hat as a sign of respect towards the fury of the wind and says, don't worry about the noise, don't worry about the water, don't worry about the wind. If you are going out, beware of mangoes and all such beautiful, sweet things. And it's a very beautiful poem, and very funny poem. But the advice is don't worry about the noise in terms of what you do. Don't worry about the water. Don't worry about the wind. Worry about all such beautiful things like success and money and fame and all that might smash into your head and do you and your students dishonor and disrespect. Thank you. We have the mic over here if anyone wants to ask questions. Gotta have a couple of questions, please. Questioning is the essence of learning. To learn to question well is essential. Oh, okay.
Well, thank you for coming. And thank you for coming me to share your wisdom with us tonight. And you talk about taking principles, and you stand a chance of risking your life or your occupation. And looking at public schools in our nation, which is being dominated by Caucasians, a minority like me, what specific advice will you give me in order for me to prepare before I take a leap, before I stand on my principles?
I think that in addressing your specific question, I think the most important thing is to find a community to teach in where there is strong support from the community. I think that it's very important. There are a lot of urban communities now in which there are people who are, and these are where some of my students are working, are involved in community-based organizations, in groups like ACORN or the Alliance Schools in Texas, where in effect you relate to frequently faith-based, church-based organizations, community-based organizations, or to school districts where there is some really progressive leadership. So you have to interview the school you're teaching in, and don't try to do it alone. So the biggest problem that you have now, Chicago has some very interesting places. The Cross City Campaign can give you a lot of information about that. The crucial thing is to find a place where you have allies, where you have other people you can work with. I can't tell you that about here because I don't know this place at all. But I know that it is almost impossible. Look, minority, in California, by the way, we have no minorities. Did you know that? Either that or everybody's a minority. At this point in the state of California, 55% of the people are people of color. You can't any longer call anyone a minority unless you're referring to white people as well. And that's just counting people who are documented. Okay? So, and in fact, I would even never use the word minority, which is what's interesting. Is in the context of the world, white people are the minority. In terms of the world's population, white people are the minority. Really are. So you want to be educationally accurate and just say poor people or kids who are being punished because of their color or their ethnicity or their culture. So you get very specific about that. And then you have to have a place where that kind of attitude is going to be acknowledged. If I could tell you where to do it here, I would be delighted. But if you're interested and want to drop me a line, I can give you a whole list of places where you go and some books you can read that will give you concrete advice. The other person to really look at is Asa Hilliard at Georgia State University. And Asa's work is really absolutely essential. He did a wonderful essay called On the Intellectual Strength of Black Adolescents years ago, many years ago. Very important piece of work. And he has a whole program in curriculum instruction and other things at Georgia State in Atlanta. Okay, and Asa knows the South the way I don't know the South. And for those of you who looked at any of Lisa Delpit's work, if you go down the hall on Georgia State University, their offices are next to each other. So Lisa Delpit and Asa Hilliard are actually right next door to each other at Georgia State. Very interesting place. That's the best I can do, at least in this context. Anybody else? Oh yeah, there are a bunch over here.
Earlier you mentioned that it's a crime to call students a failure.
Yeah.
about social promotion then, and social promotion, not allowing students to fail, and it doesn't seem to fit in with today's trends in high-stakes testing, and I was wondering where you stand on those two issues.
Well, see, from my perspective, social promotion is dependent on having a grade system. Who says that there should be 12 grades? Who says that you have to get all the kids the same age in the same class at the same time? Who says that promotion is the way to organize and structure a school? So I would say that there are two levels to deal with it. I don't think you should promote a kid if the kid can't do anything that they're going to be expected to do the next year in a system that's going to fail. If you can't do that, or if you can do, look, you know, social promotion is a sure success to throwing kids out of school. It's surely going to succeed in dumping a lot of kids out of school. That is refusing social promotion. What are you going to do? Have a 12-year-old in a kindergarten? And have a 16-year-old in junior high school? It's bizarre. It means that you're not teaching well, you're not doing anything to help the kids, you're solving a problem from the outside. So I'm all for the reorganization of schools and the rethinking of what we offer kids and making high demands on all the kids, but doing it in many different ways. I think that, as I said, social promotion is a consequence of this bizarre organization of schools that we happen to have in the United States. You know, I think I would just have cohorts of kids. I would break down schools into small communities, small houses, the way a lot of people in the Coalition of Essential Schools talk about, or the way in which the Pro-City Campaign or the Small Schools Network is talking about, ways which have been done very effectively in New York and somewhat effectively in Chicago and Minneapolis and a bunch of other places. And, you know, small, you know, what I can say is, I'm not going to promote the kids. By the way, if the, let's get, these, you know why they don't, I'll tell you what they do in Texas. You have to take a test, a TOS test, I think it's 3rd grade, 6th grade, and 9th grade. So they refuse to socially promote all kinds of kids who are in the 2nd grade, so that they jack up the 3rd grade scores of the schools, then they skip them on to the 4th grade the next year. This is a cynical social engineering, is what I see. It's totally cynical social engineering based on the notion that some kids are disposable and other kids aren't. It's just like the idea of punishing schools that fail instead of helping them. We're going to deprive schools that fail instead of saying we're going to help schools that fail. If, you know, Jonathan Coeswell's book, Savage Inequalities, if all the schools he describes in there were given as much as the richest school in this town, then let's talk about failure. Then let's talk about effectiveness. Then let's talk about opportunity and access to learning. But until the society has a will to do that, some of us have to keep on speaking out against injustice. These are just not just. You know, I'm real cynical and angry at that stuff. Why not? I'm old enough to be cynical and angry. I'm not cynical. The funny thing is I'm not cynical or angry about any children. I don't give up on kids. I'm tenacious, in fact. Yeah.
This is kind of like a broad question for you, but there's a growing frustration among art teachers in America. How do you feel about the inclusion of art and visual arts in our schools?
A life without art is an impoverished life, period. And that the very idea that people would consider art as an elective or a frill or something secondary is another testimony to a cynical, materialistic, and fundamentally uncaring attitude on the part of the schools, and then the attitude. You know, where are all the arts taught? In the private schools for the rich. Never think of not having an art program in private schools for the rich. It's like, what do? We take children of the poor and we give them low-level cognitive skills, try to force them into obedience, deprive them of the arts and electives, and then say, oh, see, they can't hack it. You go to schools for the rich, whether they're public schools or whether they're not public schools. You'll have rich art programs, you have music programs, you'll have dance programs, you'll have chess clubs, you'll have literary circles, you'll have who knows what. So, you know, but the point is, given that I'm a writer, if I didn't believe in literacy, then nobody would buy my books. So even on the most cynical level. My son's a musician, one of my daughters is a painter, and my other daughter is a community organizer who works with theater groups and community-based organizers and unions. Now, their life and my life and the lives of people that are engaged in the arts, whatever you do, is very, very rich and rewarding, humanly complex, and the arts are also a medium towards consciousness, self-consciousness, the development of awareness of self, the awareness of conscience. So I would say, well, you asked what I thought about it. I think it's outrageous, but I think it's a manifestation often of racism. It's a manifestation of scorn for the poor and the children of the poor. It's a manifestation of greed on the part of people who don't want to pay taxes when they have more money that they need, that they could possibly use. I can give you a lot of other reasons. No, I think that we have to fight as hard as we conceivably can for the richest educational program we can have for the kids, which certainly includes, without question, the arts, the sciences, and by the way, real science, and real math. Math is an art. I mean, to be a creative mathematician, you have to be an artist. And I was talking on the way over about the whole question of, you start looking at scientists, and what are they? They're musicians, they sketch and draw, they do, mathematicians love to play string quartets, or some of them, like the computer scientists I know, who are the most creative in Silicon Valley, play jazz. And that's not an entertainment for them, it is a soul-felt, heartfelt need. Just as filmmaking is. Every school should have a filmmaking program for the kids. Right now with digital cameras, you can use digital video and a simple digital editing machine that any software that any school-based computer can install and create a film studio. You have a music studio in every school. Get one of these things that cuts a CD, the kids can cut their own CDs. Why not? But those riches do exist. They exist at Dalton School in New York. They exist at Trinity School in New York. They exist at Andover and Exeter. They exist at Groton and Hotchkiss. They exist at all the elitist schools because parents want their children to be powerful, but the access to resources and the prior experience that the parents have had are not always the same from school to school, district to district, and kid to kid. We have a district in Marin County that spends about $15,000 a year per student, and one that isn't but 5 miles away that spends $6,000. Guess who goes to the district that spends $6,000? That's why we have to fight for social justice. It ain't fair to the kids. This isn't fair. So the arts arts, immediately the deprivation of arts gets you back into, again, the same issues of equity, justice, access to resources, and what are teachers willing to fight for their students. I don't have all the answers, because if I did, I guarantee you I'd be out doing it. And I've tried to do it, and continue to try to do it, but these are things you should keep in mind when you take all the joys you can with your students, and you steal some time for the creative capacity of your students to develop as fully as possible. And that could come in any field, the arts, the sciences, literature, even business. Why not? Anyway, why don't we take just a few more questions, because I've been at this a long time today. How about 2 more questions, if there are 2 more? And I think a lot of people have to leave. I sense a little rustling among the crowd.
In my observations, the scariest thing that I've come across are the number of children who are very intelligent. They have a lot of social and behavioral disorders, and they lack the ability to interact in the classroom. How can you promote them if they cannot, I mean, they're very intelligent, but they just cannot socially interact with others?
Well, that's a complex and interesting question. I'll give you a glib and simple answer. No, I'm just joking. First of all, the question is, what is the behavioral structure and culture of the classroom that allows intelligent kids to be bored and not able to move around and do things in ways that are, and learn in ways that are most comfortable to them? Big question. There's a wonderful book called The Myth of the Hyperactive Child, in which the suggestion is that hyperactivity is a structure of the social nature of schools vis-a-vis certain high-energy kids. Now, my son is high energy. Don't you call him hyperactive. And don't you call him a behavioral problem. You allow him, as long as he doesn't hurt anybody else, to move around in ways that are comfortable for him to learn. The whole question of intelligent kids and smart kids who don't learn means usually, not always, because I won't say this is universal, but I would say almost usually it's an attempt to control the creative genius, control the physical energy and the exuberance of kids, and that's the whole phenomenon of Ritalin. We dope them up. I mean, my whole theory is that anyone who gives kids Ritalin should be arrested for selling drugs. Yeah, it should really be considered a drug salesman. I know the special ed establishment doesn't like me very much, but sometimes you have to say things in a very emphatic and strong way. Because that's giving kids speed. That's giving kids amphetamines. Nobody knows the long-term effects. We're beginning to see the long-term effects of giving kids who are, quote, hyperactive and very smart amphetamines, especially when they move into adolescence. The long-term effects then, when they're 25, 30, 35, is some kind of brain damage, it seems. I think you'll be real careful to constantly examine your classroom to say, are there modifications I can make for these kids, rather than do I classify the kids? I have kids coming up to me saying, I have attention deficit disorder. What do you think? Well, I don't like to sit around and read this stupid stuff and take these stupid tests. Well, I don't either. That's not attention deficit disorder. That's good judgment. And go and I twice, once at Carleton College, and once when I was talking at MIT, two people came up to me and said, I'm dyslexic. I said, you're dyslexic. Why? Because I read slow. Okay, so here you are. How are you doing? What are you studying at Carleton College? Well, I'm studying literature. How are your grades? I'm an A- student in Carleton College. I said, you're an A- student and you're dyslexic. The other guy was getting his PhD at MIT. But they bought into this category stuff. I read slowly. Does that mean that I have to finish more books than you do, or read them faster if I understand them just as well? Do you want me to write faster? I write very slow. I write a lot of books. I think I've written about 40, but they're real slow. Just think about it, a page a day for 40 years, and you get a lot of books. Right? The whole question of pace, of tempo, the whole industrialization and mechanization of learning, the whole notion that movement is not possible in the classroom, the whole notion that you always have to pay attention to what the teacher does. The kids don't ask questions. They're told what to do. You wouldn't want to do that at home with your own kids. You want to sit down and have a talk with them. You want to do some art with them. You want to listen to some music. You want to share stuff with them. You want to have dinner with them. Oh, look, you're out running in the lawn. You're running too fast. You're hyperactive. Right? You gotta slow down. Then if you run too slow, oh, you're running too slow. Must be something wrong with your motor skills. Can't win. My daughter told me when she was in, not my kindergarten, another kindergarten, teacher was testing all the kids for all this nonsense about ADD and dyslexia and she had to walk the balance beam. And Tony at that point, not anymore, she's very much at ease in large groups of crowds of people. That one was very shy, and she kind of fell off the beam, you know. I couldn't walk on the teacher called my wife and myself in. So we think you have a little perceptual motor problem here with your daughter. And she may have some little problems with hand-eye coordination. Tony was reading at this point, by the way. Perfectly well. We walked to school the day that we went to see the teacher, and there was a high wall, about yay high, that was thinner than the balance beam. And Tony walked to school with us on the wall. Right? Just completely walked to school with us on the wall. Got into school and told the teacher, look, forget it. Either treat her as well as you can and forget all this classification and categorization, take the balance beam and put it wherever you want to. Well, I come from New York, so I have a certain flair with certain kinds of language. And leave her alone. Just let her grow. Just leave her alone. I think you have to think about this very seriously. I think it is a weighty decision to stigmatize a child. You're not a doctor. There's no physiological evidence that there's anything wrong with most kids who are classified as hyperactive or anything of that sort. There is no brain scan that you've done. There's no chemical test that indicates any physiological damage. That is teacher's judgment. And the judgment of, quote, specialists. That is purely subjective. Purely psychological, and almost 80 to 90% in the service of behavior management to make your life as an adult easier, but not the kid's life easier. Case closed.
I would like to thank Mr. Kohl for being here, and I hope that his provocative comments will lead to some further dialogue and perhaps even action among you and your colleagues. I do invite you to join us for a reception and book signing in the social room, but first please join me in